topic I'm looking at this afternoon will be selecting research design in studio-based research. What we are going to look at in this course will be the introduction. We'll look at terms that we are going to use. We'll look at the purpose of research design. We'll look at the characteristics of a good research design. We'll look at research designs in studio-based research. We'll look at criteria for selecting a research design. Then afterwards, we'll draw a conclusion. Research designs are plans and procedures for research which opinions are from broad-based, hypothetical to precise styles of data collection and analysis. The overall decision involves which design should be used for the study. Again, informing this decision should be the worldview, hypotheticals, and the research brings to the study. Procedures for inquiry, that is what we call the strategies, and specific styles of data collection, analysis, and interpretation. The selection of a research design is also grounded on the nature of the research problem and issues being addressed, the research personal experiences, and the audiences for the study. These three terms we want to understand from the beginning. The first one is research methodology. When we talk of research methodology, we are referring to the study of methods and establish an understanding of why these methods are used for the research. So at our level, we are not only interested in defining the methods, but we should be able to justify why these methods are coherent or appropriate or suit the kind of design that you are doing. It gives you the opportunity to provide a logical explanation behind the steps taken in the research design. Now we are talking about research design. It's the master plan specifying the methods and procedures for collection and analyzing the needed information. The last one that we shall look at is research method. And this consists of all the techniques and methods which are employed by a researcher in a research process to find a solution to the research problem. Now, having understood these three terms, let's go to the purpose of research design. Research design are used for the following purposes, not exclusively, but as part of the research purposes that are used. One, to minimize the expenditure. Of course, at the end of the day, apart from the delimitation, the research design that you select will also help you in reducing the expenditure that you incur in conducting the research. A typical example, if you decide to pick a case study, and under that method, you are only interested in one individual, then you realize that the expenditure is going to be minimal as compared to if we're doing a holistic type of research. Again, it's supposed to help us to facilitate the smooth scaling from one end of the procedure to the other. Because when you pick a research design, it will guide you to know how the processes are. So you move from one level to the other smoothly. It will help you to collect the relevant data and techniques. So you know which data you're going to collect and which techniques you are going to use in collecting that data. It's also going to help in providing a blueprint for the plans. So anytime you are moving from one level, you know this is what you have envisaged. So you move on smoothly to that level. It's also going to provide an overview for other researchers or other experts. So the next time somebody also is interested in doing the same type of research and wants to employ the type of research design that you use, this research design that you have used already is now going to help that person as an overview in his attempt to also go into the research. The last but not least is also to provide direction as to how things must be done within that area. Let's look at a few characteristics of a good research design. The emphasis is on a good research design, not just any research design, but a good one. Now, the following characteristics are assumed to be the guiding or yard marks that determines which one is good and which one is not good. One, the research design that you use must be objective. Objectivity here is of the procedure that you may be used to judge the degree of agreement between the final scores assigned to the different individuals by more than one independent observer. So for instance, if you are two observers, whatever criteria I'm going to use, and if I have another colleague, he can also decide to use the same criteria, or even when he uses a different criteria, at the end of the day, whatever we are supposed to observe should be the same. Reliability. Over here, it refers to the consistency throughout a series of measurements. So anytime you ask somebody, what is your name? It's supposed to be the same information coming so that you can rely on that information the person is providing for you. Then we are talking about validity here, which is measuring the instrument of the valid. The instrument is supposed to be valid when it measures what is expected to measure. So anytime I ask you, what is your name? I expect to hear your name and not your age or your hometown or whatever. When that is done, then we can say that that design is valid. We are talking about generalizability, the ability to factor the responses to the general group. Of course, we are talking about research design. We have not restricted ourselves to whatever type of research design we are talking of. So we are just giving the general characteristics of research design in general. When we pick one, then depending on which design it falls under, we can then assume how it's supposed to be. Of course, we know it's not every research that must be generalized to the population. However, some are. And over here, we are talking about the general characteristics of the research design. It also provides adequate information. Now, when the research design is good, it will help the researcher to be able to pick all the necessary information that is required in dealing with the design. And over here, we're talking about identifying the exact research problem to be studied. We are talking about the objective of the research. We are talking about the processes of obtaining information. We are talking about availability of adequate and skilled manpower and availability of adequate financial resources. Sometimes as students, we are tempted to indicate financial resources as a limitation, especially if we are unable to pick the data to correspond to the objectives or the research question that we have picked. However, finances is not supposed to be a limitation, but if you are able to gather enough resources based on the information and the financial constraint that is available to you, then we are believing that that research design that you have selected is good. So sometimes we have to look at our pocket size to determine what research design we can use. Now over here, let's attempt to look at the types of research designs that we have. The first one that we already know is what we call the quantitative. And over here, it deals with a type of research that requires numerals or figures to be used instead of words in describing the outcome of the study. And over here, two methods will be explained. The first one is survey research, and the second one will be experimental research. Under the survey research of quantitative research, we are talking about numeric description of trends, attitude, or opinions of a population by studying a sample of that population. Now over here, you are not interested in the whole population, but you're going to study a sample. And out of that, you are only interested in the numeric description of the trends. Then we talk of experimental research, which seeks to determine whether a specific treatment influences an outcome. So for instance, if I decide to stop talking, and that makes you pay more attention, then I want to use that as a method to see whether anytime I stop talking, you are going to pay attention. And if it corresponds in that way, then we can say that my being silent will influence you to pay attention. So that can also be considered as a quantitative research. The second category of research design will be what we call the qualitative research. And over here, we are looking at issues like case study, a method that is called case study. And over here, we have several types of case studies. But for the purpose of this study, we are not going into the details. I'm only giving you an idea as to the methods that come under this design. And the case study is an intensive study of a phenomena. Over here, let's agree that this case study can be an individual subject case study, or it can be a group case study. We also have narrative research, which is a design of inquiry from the humanistic or humanities, whereby the researcher studies lives of individuals and seeks them and asks them to provide series of responders to the stories about their lives. Then we have the phenomenological research, which aims to understand a phenomena or an event by describing participants' lived experiences. So in the case of the phenomenological research, the researcher is interested in describing whatever individual has gone through. Let's say under the COVID, if somebody went through COVID and you want to find out how the person survived or the kind of ordeal the person went through, then in that case, the phenomena here is the COVID, and that is the kind of research method you are using. Under the same qualitative research, we are looking at grounded theory. And over here, it aims to develop a theory inductively by systematically analyzing qualitative data. So over here, you have the data, and when you analyze the data, whatever comes out, you feel you can use that as a theory that will guide you in doing your research. The next set of design under the qualitative is what we call the ethnographic research. And over here is a design of inquiry coming from an anthropology or sociologic dimensions, where the researcher is interested in studying patterns of behavior, language, and action of an intact cultural group. The idea is to understand how those cultural patterns play out in that group of individuals. And over here, as an artist, if we are interested in that dynamics, then we have to look at the art components or the artifacts within that community and study it and come out with your outcome. The next set of qualitative design will be, under the qualitative, will be action research. And over here, in the past, when we were dealing with the undergrad course, we were made to know that it was the only type of research that the university was allowing at that time. It's called the practitioners' research, where individuals within a group decide to find solution to activities in their realm of practice and attempt to solve it. Now over here, this is a type of research that attempts to solve the problem before reports are written. And that procedure is called the intervention. So when you have identified the problems, you need to intervene to see how best you can solve the problem. So you start with the pre-test and you go through the processes and you do post-test to see whether the remedy has been found for the issues that you consider as a problem. The last set of research design will be what we call the mixed methods or hybrid, or sometimes it's called split paradigm. Whichever you want to use, we are considering the same thing called mixed methods. And over here, we'll look at three of them: sequential mixed method, where procedures are based on the researcher's elaborate idea of expanding the findings of one method with another method. So sequential, whatever happens here, you are trying to expand onto the next method that you use. This may involve beginning with a qualitative interviews for exploratory purposes and following that with quantitative survey method with a large sample so that the researcher can generate results for the population. So over here, realize that the person started with interviews on a small one, and interviews are based on qualitative, and at the end of the day, decide to jump on using survey method to get a larger sample for that. Then we have what we call the concurrent mixed methods, which is a procedure that the researcher adapts to converge and merge qualitative and quantitative data in order to provide comprehensive analysis of the research problem. We have what we call transformative mixed methods, which are procedures that a researcher adapts and uses a theoretical lens of an overreaching perspective within a design that contains both qualitative and quantitative method of data collection, the outcome of which are supposed to change the anticipated approach that we use in the study. Now, at least we have now known the three research designs that we have. The idea is selecting. Knowing is one way, and identifying which one is the best for your design is the next one. We are now going to look at how to select the appropriate research design. Having prior knowledge of the different types of research design and guidance by a careful analysis of the statement of the problem, the research questions, conceptual stroke theoretical frameworks, and the analysis of relevant literature. The researcher should, at this moment, be able to select the most appropriate and relevant research design. Now, the same selecting processes, there's a need to work through a further series of questions to help you select the most appropriate research design. 6 questions you have to ask yourself as a researcher. The first one is, what will be the most suitable methodology, approach, or research style? When you are able to answer this, then that can guide you in determining which of the designs that we have discussed that will be appropriate for your study. What kind of data do you anticipate gathering? Is it qualitative data? Is it quantitative data? The moment you say qualitative data, then it's more or less going to determine that you are going to use qualitative research design. The moment you are interested in an in-depth information, and therefore you believe that is going to be qualitative, that will also guide you in selecting the kind of design that you want. Or if you want a little bit of that and a little bit of that, that will also guide you. So we should know the kind of data that we anticipate to collect. How might your data be gathered? What method do you intend using in gathering the data? That can also determine. For instance, the moment you say you are going to use questionnaire, remember, questionnaire is designed for a specific type of design. So that moment is giving you an idea that you are veering towards quantitative rather than qualitative. And the moment you say you are going to use interview, then remember, by that idea, you are thinking of qualitative instead of quantitative. From whom will you gather this data? That can also give you an idea as to the size of the population. If you want 20 people or you want 200 people, the moment you have an idea that I'm going to deal with the whole participants in Winneba, that is large enough to be considered as quantitative instead of qualitative. Then how might you analyze the data? If we were talking about using frequencies, statistics, descriptions, standard deviations, chi-squares, and the rest, then you are thinking of quantitative. But if you are interested in narrative, descriptive, historical, then again you should also agree that you are thinking of qualitative research design. How might you intend displaying the data? Do you want to do it in graph form? Do you want to use figures? The moment you are thinking of graph form or you are thinking of figures, then equally you are thinking of quantitative. The moment you think of using thematic and then narration or contextual or textual, then you're also thinking of qualitative. Now, let's look at the criteria. Having known the selection procedure, let's look at the criteria. So given the possibility of qualitative, quantitative, or mixed method approaches, factors that affect a choice of one approach over another of the design are 6 areas. The first one is worldview, strategy, method, the research problem, the personal experience of the researcher, and the audience to whom the researcher will be reporting the information to. So we'll look at the worldview, we'll look at the strategies, then we'll look at the methods. So when we pick quantitative approach, what is the worldview? It's considered as post-positivist worldview. The strategies that we use here is experimental strategy of inquiry. Then the method will be pre- and post-test measures of attitude. Now, if we pick qualitative approach, the worldview will be constructive worldview. Then the strategy will be ethnographic design. Then the method will be observation or behavior. Again, under the same qualitative approach, we can decide to have a worldview that is considered as participatory. Another one, the strategy will be narrative design. Then the method that you are going to use will be an open-ended interview question. The last approach here will be mixed method approach. Under this, the worldview is called pragmatic. Then, what strategies do we use? Collecting of both quantitative and qualitative method sequentially. And over here, once you have decided to use qualitative and quantitative strategy, then the methods that are available for both qualitative and quantitative can also be considered. Having looked at these first three criteria, that is well viewed, the strategy and method, now let's look at the research problem. Because sometimes the research problem that you identify or you select can also align you to a certain research design that you need to use. Certain types of studio-based research problems call for specific approach. Now, when we are looking at quantitative approach, it's best used if the problem calls for 1, an identification of factors that influence an outcome. 2, the utility of an intervention. Or 3, the understanding of the best predicators of outcomes. It is also the best approach to use to test theories or explanations. So for instance, if you are in any of the research designs under art or the studio base, you want to find out, for instance, if you're a ceramist and you've been told that glazes are formed by adding chemicals, and let's say you want to find a glaze of a yellow color, and you'll be told to use magnesiums and maybe potassium. That has been established. But you don't want to pick that as a normal trend. So you want to interrogate that theory to see. Now we've been told, for instance, in our normal color schemes, they have developed some color schemes for us. So anytime you want to use harmonious color scheme, you have been given prescribed colors that you can use. But as an artist, if you want to deviate from that, then it means at that time you want to test that theory to see whether you can still create harmonious colors without necessarily going through what has been laid down. On the other hand, if a concept or phenomenon needs to be understood because little research has been done on it, then the merit of qualitative research is required. This information or this research area is more or less neutral, or let's say virgin. Not so much information is available on that. So if you're interested in such a research, then you have to have in-depth understanding of the proceedings within that research realm. And therefore, qualitative research approach will be prescribed for you. A mixed method design is useful when either qualitative or quantitative approach by itself is inadequate to understand a research. So when you look at the nature of a research and realize that if I use only quantitative, I may not be able to get the outcome of the research. Or if I look at only quantitative, I might not be able to get solution to my research problems. Then you can decide to employ the two paradigms that we have, that's quantitative and qualitative. And in that case, you are now forming a new paradigm that is called the split paradigm or the mixed method approach. Number 5 will be personal experiences of the researcher. Now, sometimes if you are a new person within research realm, you do not have that capacity of understanding research patterns, and that can guide you in selecting a type of research that you feel you can handle. Now that you mature through research processes, then that can give you a capacity to take a kind of research that is so much involving that will help you understand whatever problem you want to pick. So the research own experiences we consider as a criteria to determine what one researcher can take. Remember, in our adage, we have that the shell that an adult will crack, a child will not attempt to. So maybe the child will be learning how to crack the shell of a snail, while the adult will be interested in cracking the shell of a tortoise. So we have to know our capacity in order to determine what kind of research design we want to use. The last criteria, but not the least, is what we call the audience. Finally, remember that you are going to report the outcome of your research to people, to audience, whether they are a group of researchers or whether they are natives of a place that do not have so much knowledge in research, or whatever group it is. That can also determine whether you need to have quantitative or whether you need to use qualitative or whether you need to use mixed method. In all this, we believe that the idea of taking either qualitative research design, quantitative research design, or qualitative research design, or mixed method will be dependent on the criteria that we have identified. And therefore, as a researcher, you should understand all this in order to guide you in selecting whatever research design is good for you. Let's also agree that two of us can have the same research problem, but looking at our interest, somebody might be required to use qualitative research whilst another person might be required to use quantitative research. Or equally, another person can take the same research problem, but he'll be interested in using mixed methods because of what we are each looking for. Because sometimes the objectives of the researcher can determine the kind of research design that must use. In concluding, we feel that in planning a research project, researchers need to identify whether they will employ a qualitative, quantitative, or mixed method design. Again, this design is based on bringing together a worldview of assumptions about research and the specific strategies of inquiry and methods to be used. Again, we should also agree, decisions about choice of a design are further influenced by the research problem or issues studied and the personal experiences of the researcher as well as the audience for whom the research design or the researcher will write. So this, in a nutshell, is how we are supposed to be molded or guided in determining which design is appropriate to be used for what kind of research approach or research problem that you have identified in studio-based method. Thank you for listening.